name's Mike Repine. I've been here about 16 years. Right now I'm a foreman for M2P, the auto paint line. I started working here in 2004. The line had been up and running for about 4 years. I basically came here looking for a welding job because I'd worked in a hot rod shop before this, working on cars and painting cars, and didn't even know they had a paint shop. They just said they needed help in the paint department, which was a lot more something I'd like to do. When I started working here, I hadn't messed with powder coat too much, so I learned a lot more working here and working with the powder coating, how to use it, how to apply it, cure it, a lot more with the chemistry on how to prep surface. I learned about all that here.
Basically everything comes in through the back. A lot of my guys will fixture everything up. They will make sure that the fixtures are in it to keep the guys safe and to help load it and keep it straight for painting. A lot of these are robotic fixtures because we have 2 robotic painters, so everything has to be hung the same way every time. So bring all the parts over here to the elevator. These guys will drive in, unload the painted parts off of either an A-frame rack like this one or a fixtured up carrier like that one. Most of the parts that we paint, a lot of it goes over to packaging to have special racks done, or forged slab, or anything the customers asked us to do to it before it left the building. Some of the smaller stuff like that rack goes to the left there, which will go around to my guys, which basically they unload it on the pallets to go to kitting, maybe go over to another department to be assembled into a machine. Once they have the part loaded, they'll send it out of this elevator here, send it over to the 8-wheel blaster, which is over there across the way. Every part will go through the blaster and try to be blasted down to bare metal. The 8-wheel blaster is automatic. There's 8 blast wheels inside, but no one's actually in there doing the blasting. It has a timer to tell it when to turn on after it passes the laser eye. It has a timer to tell it when to shut off when it should have passed all the way through. Once it's been blasted completely, it'll come out the other end into what we call the blow-off room. In the blow-off room, the operator basically has to go through. He has to make sure that everything's been blown off, most tubes have been cleared out, and all shots have been removed from the part before it moves on to pre-treatment. It'll move from there straight over into the pre-treatment wash. Once it gets into the wash system, it's a 5-stage wash. The first stage is basically just an industrial heavy soap degreaser. Sprays down the entire part that's on that carrier to loosen up and get rid of any debris or grease or dirt that may be left on it. The second stage is a heavy spray rinse. We'll rinse all the soap, debris, and dirt and gunk off of the part. The third stage is the actual zirconium pre-treatment we put on it. It's an anti-rust. It will coat the entire carrier down with an anti-rusting agent. Stage 4 is a rinse that rinses down to make sure the zirconium is not too thick. If it's too thick, the paint won't stick to it. Or it will outgas up through the paint, ruining the finish. The 5th stage is a final rinse, just to make sure everything has been rinsed clean, the zirconium is not too thick, and to keep the part moist for when it goes through the dry off to keep it from flash rusting. Once it comes out of the wash system here and it's been pre-treated, it then goes into the dry off. The dry off heats that part up to 275 degrees. Basically, the point is to try to boil out and heat out any water that's in that part. It does about 80–85% of the water. Now, it won't get it all out. There'll still be some water in little cracks and crevices and little imports like that, but once it's gone through the drying system, gets up here to the plugger, our plugger will then go through, blow off the whole carrier, make sure there's no water, no shot, no debris. She'll also be checking the coating color out. to make sure that it doesn't look like it's flash rusted, that the coating's not too heavy like a white haze. And then she'll plug the bores or mask off threads or put plugs over the threads or anything the customers ask us to keep paint off of. Once she's done with it, but she has to keep things moving as much as she can, she'll send it around the bend over to the paint room. Then as the parts line up outside the paint room, the painters try to keep them moving through the window as quickly as possible. As I said before, we have two booths in here. We have one robotics booth, which right at the moment we're not utilizing because the parts we have here are more rare parts that we're actually not going to keep around much longer, so they're not a program made for it. When it is programmed, it will come in and it hits a trigger up there on the track that turns on the robotic arm. They'll come in and start painting the whole carrier. And then the secondary booth where my two manual painters are, normally there's one person in there and he just touches up around the hooks, maybe an inside somewhere where we don't feel the robotic arm can get in and out of while it's moving. Everything on this line has to be done while it's moving. That's one bad thing about it is that you kind of can't hold things up. You got to keep everything going. But on hand paint stuff, it's a little harder because it goes through the 12 guns there. It'll put a heavy coat down over the whole carrier, but then they'll have to paint the top, the bottom, the inside, the outsides, around all the hooks and fixtures. While they're doing that, they have to keep an eye on the texture of the powder because they have to make sure they're not putting it on too heavy, but yet again, making sure they're putting it on thick enough to be within specs of the paint. That's one of the hard parts about powder coating is you're not seeing it as it would be when it's secured. You can put a paint on and look like it's covered, but if you're not thick enough with the actual powder, when you cure, it'll flow. And if it's not thick enough, it'll show right through and you'll see a light spot in bare metal, and then the whole part has to be redone. Redoing a part takes about 8 hours. Each part will then have to be burnt off, re-blasted, pre-treated, and repainted. Now these are the paint centers for both paint booths. One for the manual booth, one for the robotics booth. Each paint center has a delivery system that takes it up to the guns. It also has a delivery system that any powder that falls from the carrier onto the floor of the paint booth into what we call the troughs. It will then be taken in from the troughs up into the waste collection system. The very minute fine particles go up through the afterfillers, through the ductwork, over to the waste filler. Good usable paint is taken back over via an air hose to the paint centers and deposited back into the paint boxes so that we can reuse whatever we didn't get on the part. As you can see in the sifter, it goes through the sifter, pours back into the bin so that they can keep moving. This also keeps us from having to add paint more and more if we can recycle a lot of the paint. Like I said, they're doing this as it's moving, so they're actually putting this powder on. It pretty much looks like baby powder, trying to make sure that they've got the proper coverage. Once they feel they have the proper coverage, they let it go. They have to stand out of the way as much as they can, letting it go. Once it's released from the paint room, it'll head over to the cure oven. We have two lanes. We have a lane A and a lane B. It'll go into the cure oven anywhere from 35 minutes to an hour. And anywhere from 375 degrees to 475 degrees, depending on the metal thickness and sometimes on the paint manufacturer or the paint color, on whether or not how long it'll take to cure. You're not actually worried about trying to get the paint hot, you're worried about getting the actual substrate hot. You have to get the metal to the curing temperature and then keep it there for a certain amount of time. So all times are based on how long it takes to get that metal that hot, and then your time for how long it has to sit in there that hot to cure the paint. And powder coat If anybody's wondering how you get it to stick to a part, everybody thinks it's kind of like a magnet. You just throw it on there and it stays, which it doesn't actually. What it is the powder is positively charged when it passes through the gun. The line itself is the ground. So when the part comes through, it's grounded by the line, the paint's positively charged, and then it adheres to the metal on the part. Makes it sound easy, but it is a little complicated because if your hand goes too fast or too slow, you can make it too thick or too thin. Therefore, you have to watch your hand speed, you have to watch the distance from the part to your gun. If your gun's too far away, the paint will lose its charge before it reaches the part. If you're too close, the paint will clump up or pile up, causing orange peel or any amount of defects to the paint coverage. Now once it's secured and it's timed out, it will automatically come out of these ovens into these cooling lanes. It will go through here at a slow pace, trying to cool it down and dissipate the heat. Once it comes out, powder coat is tough, but when it first comes out, it is very soft. You can stick your fingernail straight through it. Basically what we're trying to do is get it to cool down and get like a hard coating going so that we can set it down on the skids to move it to the next process. Now technically from different sources it said that powder coat isn't completely cured for 2 to 3 days after you've painted it. So basically we still process it, but we are very careful with it. So by the time we send it to a customer and remove it, or they find it and remove it, it's been set up for 2 to 3 days, and it's got that hard coating that everybody wants. It's very durable and can withstand a lot of punishment.